Among the ancient sacred initiations, none were held in greater esteem than the rites performed at Eleusis. These ceremonies were conducted in reverence to the goddess known by many names: Ceres, Demeter, Rhea, or Isis, and her daughter Persephone. The devotees of this tradition earned distinction throughout the Greek world for the elegance of their spiritual doctrines and the high moral integrity they demonstrated in everyday life. Their influence extended far beyond their native soil, reaching distant lands such as Rome and Britain, where the teachings found fertile ground and were continued with equal solemnity. The name of the mysteries themselves derives from the village in Attica, where the first sacred enactments are said to have occurred, and their founding is traditionally credited to the sage Eumolpos in an age long before recorded time. Through the philosophical teachings preserved by Plato and his successors, the ideals of this school have remained present even into later ages. The rites at Eleusis were more than ceremonies. They were the living embodiment of nature's deepest truths, wrapped in allegory and symbol. So profound was their influence that other smaller spiritual traditions were gradually absorbed into their structure, contributing their own wisdom to the greater body of the mysteries. Scholars such as Hecathorn have suggested that the rituals devoted to Ceres and Bacchus were in fact later expressions of the same sacred drama once played out in honor of Isis and Osiris. All such secret traditions appear to be varied expressions of a single universal teaching, one root, extending from the unseen, blossoming across the world in diverse yet connected forms. The mysteries served as channels through which this hidden light was shared, and those who passed through their initiations emerged with both intellectual clarity and spiritual insight. These were the fruits of the sacred tree, whose silent origin gave rise to all understanding and all truth manifest in the world. The ceremonies were classified into two distinct levels of experience, the first called the Lesser Mysteries, and the second, the Greater. According to certain authorities, the lesser rites were held during the time of the early blossoming season, in a place not far from Athens, while the greater ceremonies took place during the time of harvest in Eleusis itself or within the city. It is believed that the lesser rites were observed with regularity each year, while the greater were reserved for special intervals. Understanding these rites demanded familiarity with the myths of Greece, which were taught not simply as stories, but as symbolic teachings illuminated by carefully guarded knowledge. The initial stage of initiation, focused on Persephone, carried deep metaphysical significance. As Thomas Taylor explains, the purpose of this phase was to reveal, through sacred drama, the state of the soul while it remains burdened by the limitations of earthly existence, trapped within physical form and entangled in material nature. The myth upon which this stage was built recounts the story of Persephone, daughter of the nurturing goddess Ceres. While wandering through a blooming field, gathering flowers, she is suddenly taken by surprise. The ground parts before her, and from the shadows of the underworld bursts Pluto, the sovereign of death. Riding his dark chariot, he seizes the terrified maiden and, despite her cries and resistance, carries her away into the realm beneath the earth. There, in the depths of his silent kingdom, she is made his bride and queen, her innocence stolen by the unseen forces of the underworld. There is reason to question whether even the majority of those initiated into the rites fully grasped the deeper symbolic intent behind the mythic narrative, as many seem to interpret it merely as a poetic explanation for the cycle of the seasons. Reliable accounts of the inner workings of the mysteries are rare, for the participants were sworn to absolute secrecy, bound by solemn vows not to disclose the sacred knowledge to outsiders. At the commencement of the initiation, the participant would stand upon the remains of animals ceremonially offered for the occasion, pledging with unwavering resolve that not even death could loosen their tongue to reveal what was to be learned. Nevertheless, certain elements of the teachings found their way into broader philosophical thought through more indirect means. The essential instruction imparted to the newcomer to the mysteries revolved around a core spiritual vision of the human being. In this vision, the soul, referred to as Psyche and represented in the ritual by the figure of Persephone, was seen as a luminous, divine entity whose rightful place lay in the upper realms, far beyond the veil of material constraint. Within those higher domains, unburdened by the grossness of form and illusion, the soul is said to experience true freedom and expression. By contrast, The earthly condition was regarded as a prison, a delusion, a source of sorrow and confusion. The body, according to this view, was not merely the physical frame but the entirety of the lower human nature, which the soul was meant to overcome. Plato echoed this notion when he spoke of the body as the grave of the soul. The somber tone of the lesser mysteries reflected the anguish of the inner self, unable to manifest its divine qualities because it had been shackled by the illusions and attachments of the worldly state. A central theme in the Eleusinian system was the idea that death offered no automatic elevation. If a person remained ignorant and unenlightened in life, that condition would persist beyond the grave. The same errors would be repeated, and the same cravings would haunt the soul in a realm where fulfillment was impossible. Thus, suffering continued in another form. This idea finds a poetic mirror in the vision of Dante's underworld, a place populated by those who, having failed to transcend their base instincts and illusions in life, are condemned to carry their torment forward into the unseen. Those who remained dormant, whose souls had not awakened to their higher calling during their time in the flesh, would upon dying enter into a shadowy state where, much like in life, they continued to sleep, unaware and unchanged. In the teachings of this school, true death was understood as entry into the physical world, whereas authentic birth occurred when the spiritual core of a person arose from the depths of their bodily condition. The idea is expressed poetically in Longfellow's observation that the soul which sleeps is already lost to life. The ancient myth of Narcissus was employed to illustrate this idea. The youth, enchanted by his own reflection in the shifting waters, a symbol of the fleeting and deceptive nature of the physical realm, perished while trying to grasp what was never real to begin with. In this way, man, captivated by his outward form and mistaking it for his essence, forfeits the very opportunity that life offers, the chance to realize his eternal self. One of the old initiates once remarked that the living are governed by the dead, a cryptic statement whose meaning becomes clearer in light of the Eleusinian philosophy. It refers to the fact that most people are led not by the living force of spirit within them, but by their dormant, lifeless lower nature. Concepts of rebirth and the soul's return to material existence were also present in these rites, though not in a conventional form. It was believed that at the moment when the world stood in its deepest stillness, the unseen realms drew closest to the earth, and souls seeking embodiment passed into the world during that time. For this reason, the rituals were frequently held in the heart of night. At that hour, those souls that had failed to awaken in previous lifetimes and now drifted aimlessly in a darkness of their own making might once again cross the threshold and take form, sometimes not in human guise, but in other shapes, depending on the nature of their past and the state of their inner being. The initiates at Eleusis placed great emphasis on the gravity of suicide, hinting at a hidden truth behind this act which they were forbidden to discuss openly. They cautioned their followers that taking one's own life brought about a profound and inescapable sorrow. This warning formed part of the deeper teachings conveyed during the earlier stages of initiation. This lower degree concentrated primarily on the suffering of those who failed to seize the philosophical possibilities of life, and the setting for its rituals reflected this theme. Dark, hidden spaces beneath the ground, where complex ceremonial performances dramatized the torments of the underworld. Once the initiate endured these dark trials, symbolized by twisting corridors and fearful challenges, they were granted the title of mysts, one whose vision was not yet clear, whose sight remained veiled. This designation implied that the seeker had come to the edge of a hidden truth that would only be fully disclosed in a later, more elevated stage. The modern term mystic, referring to a spiritual seeker guided more by inner conviction than by external knowledge, likely finds its origin in this ancient title, where faith meant belief in realities beyond ordinary perception. The advanced ceremonies, reserved for those who had already passed through the preliminary ordeals, were devoted to the goddess associated with the harvest and the mother of the lost maiden, whose descent and return formed the central theme. She was portrayed as roaming the earth, searching for her child who had vanished. In her hands she carried two guiding lights, one standing for instinctive insight, the other for rational thought, which aided her in this quest. Her search eventually led her close to the very site of the sanctuary, where she discovered her daughter again. In thanks, she bestowed upon the people the knowledge of cultivating grain, and it was here that she established the sacred rites. She also sought an audience with the ruler of the realm of souls, entreating him to release her daughter from his shadowy kingdom. He refused at first, reminding her that the maiden had tasted the fruit of the underworld, binding her to his domain. In time, however, a compromise was reached. The daughter could return to the world above for part of the cycle, but would dwell in the darkness for the remainder. In the Hellenic worldview, this figure represented a force akin to the sun, retreating into the depths during the cold, barren season, and rising again during the fertile months. Myth told that the plants grieved at her departure, and each year as she returned to shadow, the natural world faded. While outsiders speculated freely about such tales, their real meaning remained hidden beneath layers of symbolism, known only to the priests who preserved the deeper truths of this wisdom tradition. A scholar of ancient teachings once summarized the higher initiations by noting that they presented, through vivid and symbolic displays, a vision of the soul's joy in this life and beyond, provided it had cleansed itself of its earthly impurities and learned to perceive with spiritual clarity. While the earlier rites spoke of the soul's descent into illusion, its entrapment in the world of appearances, the later ceremonies unveiled the mystery of inner rebirth and offered a path toward emancipation from the errors of sense and form. The soul, like the firebringer chained to the mountain, was bound by the weakness of its outer self. The process of entering physical existence was symbolized by a journey through successive layers of reality, each one distancing the soul further from its origin. Though the precise methods by which the higher initiates were trained have been lost, there are signs they resembled teachings from the East. This is supported by the final invocation used at the close of the rites, an ancient phrase of foreign origin, hinting at a deeper, shared spiritual heritage. The portion of the myth that speaks of Persephone dividing her time between the underworld and the land of the living carries profound symbolic meaning. It appears the Eleusinian initiates understood this as more than a tale of seasonal change. There are indications they believed the soul could temporarily separate from the body during sleep, or at least be trained to do so through the methods passed on in their tradition. In this interpretation, Persephone remained in Pluto's realm during one's waking life, bound to the physical world, but during sleep she could rise and commune with higher spiritual realities. The sacred teachings guided the aspirant in seeking Pluto's favor to release Persephone, symbolizing the soul, from the grip of material limitation, so it might ascend into the clarity of divine awareness. Once this elevation was achieved, the soul became liberated not just for a fleeting moment but for all time, having awakened the inner faculties through which it would later express itself in the realm beyond death, known as the heavenly or divine sphere. In contrast to the somber imagery of the underworld, the gods were envisioned as dwelling atop lofty mountains. Mount Olympus was a prime example, home to the principal deities of Greek mythology. During the sacred journey, the candidate progressed through chambers of growing brightness, symbolizing the spirit's ascent from the dense world of illusion into ever greater states of purity and joy. This culminated in the arrival at a vast chamber, radiant and awe-inspiring, where a resplendent image of the goddess Ceres stood at the center. Here, under the guidance of the Hierophant and in the company of elaborately dressed priests, the initiate received the most sacred of the hidden teachings. Upon completing this experience, the seeker attained the title of Epopts, one who had witnessed the truth firsthand. This was why the rite was also known as a vision of the sacred, or autopsy. The newly illumined initiate was entrusted with secret texts, likely encoded in symbolic language, as well as stone tablets inscribed with hidden instructions preserved through generations. According to the obelisk in Freemasonry by John A. Weiss, the officiants in these rites included both male and female hierophants who presided over the ceremonies, supported by torchbearers of each gender, a male herald, and male and female attendants at the altar. Various other figures also took part in the rituals. Drawing on Porphyry's interpretations, Weiss explains that the Hierophant symbolized the divine craftsman described by Plato as the world's architect. The torchbearer corresponded to the solar principle. The altar attendant represented the moon. The herald was linked to Hermes, the messenger of the gods, and the lesser figures stood for the fixed stars that populate the heavens. Accounts that have survived suggest the rituals were often accompanied by extraordinary and unexplained phenomena. Some participants even claimed to witness the living presence of the gods. Whether such visions were born of heightened spiritual awareness or aided by unseen powers working through the ritual remains an open question. In the Metamorphosis, also known as the Golden Ass, the philosopher Apuleius offers a vivid and poetic account of what is likely his own passage through these rites. "I came to the very edge of death and stepped across the threshold of the goddess of the dead. From there I returned, passing through the elements in turn. At the hour when night was deepest, I beheld the sun radiating in full brilliance. I stood before both the deities beneath and those above, and I honored them face to face." The Eleusinian Mysteries welcomed women and children into their ceremonies, and over time, the number of participants grew immensely. However, not all were suited to receive the deeper spiritual insights at the heart of the tradition. As a result, a natural separation emerged within the initiatory body. Only a select few, recognized for their intellectual depth and ability to comprehend the hidden truths, were entrusted with the more profound teachings. Socrates famously chose not to undergo initiation. Familiar with the core doctrines without formally joining the order, he understood that once sworn to secrecy, he would no longer be free to discuss such matters. That these rites were grounded in lasting, universal principles is shown by the reverence they inspired in some of antiquity's greatest thinkers. As M. Uvaroff observed, figures such as Pindar, Plato, Cicero, and Epictetus would not have spoken of the mysteries with such admiration had the Hierophant merely delivered personal opinions rather than unveiling truths of enduring philosophical weight. The garments worn during initiation were preserved long after the ceremony, treated with deep respect and even regarded as possessing sacred significance. Just as wisdom and virtue are the only proper coverings of the soul, so the initiate, having not yet attained understanding, began the ritual unclothed. First, they were given the hide of an animal, symbolizing their primitive state. Later, a sanctified robe was bestowed, marking the transformation brought by the teachings received. The ritual journey led the candidate through a pair of symbolic thresholds. One descended into shadow, representing entry into the world of confusion and ignorance. The other rose into a radiant chamber filled with unseen illumination, where a statue of the goddess Ceres awaited. This ascent symbolized the soul's return to the domain of light and truth. Similar architectural symbolism was employed in ancient sanctuaries associated with Zoroastrian tradition, where sacred spaces featured dual portals signifying birth and departure from the material realm. Porphyry offered a vivid description of the symbolic vision at the heart of the Eleusinian Mysteries. He explained that the divine, being a radiant essence residing within the finest flame, remains unseen to those who are entangled in the physical world. Transparent materials, crystal, fine marble, ivory, were thought to echo divine clarity, while gold stood for incorruptibility. A dark stone, on the other hand, might have represented the hidden nature of the divine. Supreme intelligence was conveyed through idealized human forms, perfect in beauty, for beauty flows from the divine source, depicted in a variety of ages and postures, of either gender, whether as youth, bride, or elder, thus encompassing the full spectrum of experience. Radiant forms were linked to the celestial gods, spherical shapes to the cosmos, sun, and moon, sometimes even to abstract forces such as hope or destiny. Circular patterns symbolized timelessness and the ordered paths of the heavens, while their segments reflected lunar phases. Shapes like pyramids and obelisks were tied to the element of fire and, by extension, to the celestial powers. The cone evoked solar energy, the cylinder the earthly plane. Generative forms like the triangle and phallus pointed toward the principle of creation. According to Hecathorn, among all the sacred orders of antiquity, the Eleusinian Mysteries endured the longest. They remained a living institution well into the Christian era, until they were forcibly abolished under the rule of a later emperor, who acted with severity against those who resisted conversion. Of this grand spiritual school, Cicero once remarked that it taught not only the art of living with purpose, but also the wisdom required to face death with understanding. Orpheus, the bard of Thrace and revered spiritual guide of the Greeks, gradually came to be honored not as a man, but as a divine being. Long before the rise of Christianity, his image had already shifted from historical figure to mythic presence. As Thomas Taylor remarks, nearly all details of Orpheus's life have been lost amid the wreckage of time. Little can be asserted with confidence about his origins, era, homeland, or status. What remains broadly accepted, however, is that Orpheus truly lived and became the foundational voice of Greek theology. He shaped their moral structure, stood at the dawn of prophetic tradition, and was exalted as the foremost of poets. Said to be the child of a muse, he bestowed upon the Greeks their sacred rites and mystical practices, and from his teachings sprang the inspiration for Homer's poetic grandeur, as well as the spiritual doctrines of both Pythagoras and Plato. Through the symbolic framework of mythology, Orpheus communicated his philosophical system, using narrative and ritual to convey deeper truths. The origins of his teachings are obscure. Some traditions suggest he derived his wisdom from contact with the Brahmins, and there are tales that hint at Indian roots, even suggesting his name may be linked to a word meaning dark or obscure. He is believed to have undergone initiation into the Egyptian mysteries, through which he gained significant insight into magical arts, astrology, healing practices, and the mystical sciences. Orpheus is also thought to have received the rites of the Cabiri at Samothrace, which further expanded his knowledge, particularly in areas concerning medicine and music. The poignant tale of Orpheus and Eurydice stands out as a defining myth within his tradition. In fleeing from a predatory pursuer, Eurydice was bitten on the heel by a venomous serpent and perished. Determined to reclaim her, Orpheus journeyed into the realm of the dead, and his music so moved the sovereigns of the underworld, Pluto and Persephone, that they agreed to release Eurydice on one condition: Orpheus must not look back at her as he led her upward to the world of the living. Tormented by anxiety that she might have lost her way, Orpheus turned to look, and in that moment Eurydice was drawn back into the shadows, her mournful cry fading into the silence of death. Heartbroken, Orpheus roamed the world in sorrow. His end is shrouded in differing accounts. One version holds that he was struck down by lightning, another that, unable to live without Eurydice, he took his own life. But the most well-known version tells that he was torn apart by the frenzied women of Thrace, whose affections he had rejected. According to a passage in Plato's Republic, the soul that had once inhabited Orpheus, wishing to avoid being born of woman after such a cruel fate, chose instead to return to earthly life as a swan. After his death, Orpheus's severed head, along with his lyre, was cast into the Hebrus River. The current carried them to the sea, where the head came to rest in a rocky crevice and continued to deliver oracles for many years. His lyre, after passing through the hands of a thief whose death it foretold, was eventually lifted to the heavens and transformed by the gods into a constellation. Orpheus has long been celebrated as the divine master of music. With the harmonies drawn from his lyre, he created melodies so profound that even the gods were stirred by their beauty. When he played, birds and wild creatures gathered in awe, and the ancient trees, compelled by his tones, strained their deep roots from the earth to follow his path through the woodlands. Orpheus is among the sacred figures who gave themselves for the sake of imparting heavenly wisdom to humanity. Through the hidden meanings within his music, he revealed sacred truths to the world. Some ancient writers suggest that while the gods admired him, they also feared the transformative force of his insight and, with sorrow, brought about his end to safeguard their dominion. In time, the man and the teachings he embodied became indistinguishable, and Orpheus came to represent the entire Greek current of ancient spiritual thought. His mythic parentage declares him to be the child of Apollo, source of perfect truth, and Calliope, the muse of epic poetry. This lineage symbolizes that Orpheus is the secret wisdom, Apollo, expressed through the harmony of sound and verse, Calliope. In the allegory of his descent to the underworld, Eurydice stands for the human soul, lost to the poison of false understanding and trapped in the realm of unknowing. Orpheus, as divine philosophy, seeks to restore her but fails at the final moment, misled by doubt in the soul's hidden light. The Ciconian women who tear him apart represent the warring sects of theology that dismember the unity of truth. They succeed only when their discord overwhelms the harmony Orpheus draws from his sacred instrument. His severed head represents the inner doctrines of his mystery tradition, which continue to speak even after the outer form has perished. The lyre itself stands for his hidden teaching. Its strings reflect the divine principles that unlock the mysteries of existence. The varied tales surrounding his end illustrate the many forces that may extinguish wisdom, each in its own way. The story of his return in the form of a swan signifies that the sacred knowledge he shared will live on, passed down by enlightened souls in every era. The swan is both the emblem of those initiated into the sacred rites and the image of the divine force from which the cosmos is born. The Bacchic rite revolves around a symbolic tale in which the young Bacchus, also known as Dionysus or Zagreus, is torn apart by the Titans. These primal beings bring about his downfall by luring him into fascination with his own reflection in a mirror. Once dismembered, his body is first boiled in water and then roasted over fire. However, Pallas manages to save his heart, and through this act, Bacchus is eventually restored to his original state. Witnessing the offense committed by the Titans, Jupiter, the creative force of the cosmos, strikes them down with his thunderbolts, reducing them to ashes with divine fire. From the remains of these beings, ashes that still contain fragments of Bacchus's divine essence, humanity is formed. Because of this, every human life is believed to carry within it a portion of the Bacchic spirit. This understanding led the Greek mysteries to regard suicide as a grave error. To take one's own life was seen as an attack on the divine nature of Bacchus residing within the body, which serves as the sacred vessel of this god and must be cared for accordingly. Bacchus is seen as the embodiment of the rational soul within the material world. He presides over the Titans, who are responsible for shaping the visible cosmos. Among the Pythagoreans, Bacchus was called the Titanic monad, the central idea behind the fragmented work of the Titans. He symbolizes the unified rational soul, while the Titans represent its division and dispersion across the fabric of creation. The mirror that draws Bacchus's attention and leads to his undoing is the illusion of the material realm crafted by the Titans. By mistaking his reflection for his true self, Bacchus, the rational principle, projects his essence into that illusion, thereby animating it. In doing so, he causes the irrational world to long for a return to its rational source. For this reason, the ancients taught that the gods are not known through argument or intellect, but through an inner awakening to their presence within the soul. After Bacchus gazes into the illusion and follows his image into the realm of form, the rational soul is fragmented by the Titans and scattered across the world, though its central essence remains beyond their reach. The act of boiling his body represents its immersion into matter, symbolizing the soul's entrapment in form. Roasting the pieces signifies the soul's eventual rise beyond material limits. Observing the chaos brought on by the Titans' attempt to dissolve the divine idea into creation, Jupiter intervenes, destroying them to prevent the complete loss of the rational principle. From their remains, he shapes the human race, whose mission is to safeguard and eventually liberate the Bacchic soul from the constraints imposed by the Titans. As the creative ruler of the cosmos, Jupiter is the power behind transformation through death, for death exists only within the realm he governs. Destruction, in his hands, becomes the path to a higher integration. His thunderbolts represent this divine disruption, unveiling death's role as a force that frees the rational soul from the grip of chaotic nature. Man is a being formed of two natures, one grounded in the chaotic essence of the Titans, and the other rooted in the divine, enduring substance of Bacchus. Because of this dual composition, he has the potential to follow either an irrational, Titanic path or a rational, Bacchic one. In Hesiod's accounts, The Titans are associated with celestial powers, most likely echoing the influence of the zodiac. However, those Titans responsible for the destruction of Bacchus symbolize these cosmic forces corrupted through their entanglement with material existence. Bacchus, as a symbol of the sun, is metaphorically torn apart by the signs of the zodiac, and from his fragmented being, the material cosmos is brought forth. This scattering results in the loss of unity and the rise of fragmentation, as the separate forms of earthly life emerge from the divisions of his body. The heart of Bacchus, preserved by the wisdom of Pallas or Minerva, is lifted from the elemental world into the realm of pure ether, representing the eternal core of the rational soul. Once the rational essence of Bacchus had been dispersed throughout creation and embedded within human nature, sacred rites were established to recover it from the grip of the titanic element. These mysteries aimed to guide the soul back from division to wholeness. The ritual process mirrored the gathering of Bacchus's scattered limbs from across the world, symbolizing the effort to restore the soul's divine unity. When every part of this rational principle is retrieved, the god is revived and made whole once again. The ceremonies of Dionysus shared much in common with those of Bacchus, and many saw them as two expressions of the same deity. In the Eleusinian rites, particularly the lesser initiations, representations of Dionysus were prominently featured. Bacchus, seen as the animating principle of the material world, could appear in countless forms and bear many names. Dionysus, in this tradition, embodied his solar and radiant aspect. An ancient initiatic order known as the Dionysiac architects held teachings and traditions that closely resembled those of modern Freemasonry. These master builders united through secret wisdom concerning the connection between divine principles and earthly construction. They are said to have assisted in the building of Solomon's temple, although they were neither of Hebrew descent nor worshippers of the Hebrew god. Their devotion lay with Bacchus and Dionysus. This fraternity was responsible for many of the architectural wonders of the ancient world. They developed a hidden script and a symbolic method for marking their stones. Regular gatherings and sacred feasts were part of their tradition. While their inner teachings remain veiled, it is thought that Hiram Abiff was among their initiates.